Hello and welcome. This interview is the first in my series publicizing the 2024 conference of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. The conference is called CSICon, and it'll take place in Las Vegas from October 24th to the 27th. Today's guest, Rina Raphael, is one of the CSICon scheduled speakers, and this is what it says about her on the conference's speaker site. Rina Raphael is a journalist who specializes in health, wellness, and misinformation. She covers the wellness industry for Fast Company magazine and has also written for the New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Wall Street Journal, Bloomberg Businessweek, and New York Magazine, among other publications. Her wellness industry newsletter, Well To Do, covers wellness trends and news. Previously, she served as a senior producer and lifestyle editor at Today.com and NBCnews.com. Welcome, Rina, and thanks for joining me today.
Excited to be here. Happy to chat.
Anything noteworthy left out of that very impressive bio that the viewers should know about?
No, it's fine. They'll get the gist. The only thing that's missing is did you mention my book? Because I think that's the reason I booked.
It's
Okay.
not mentioned in there, so yeah.
Yeah, so I wrote a book last year called The Gospel of Wellness, Gyms, Gurus, Goop, and the False Promise of Self-Care. And it basically answers the question of why everyone got so obsessed with wellness over the last 15 years, and specifically why the American wellness industry is so very different from all the other wellness industries around the world. We're actually pretty unique. We spend the most amount of money on what's called wellness. It really kind of focuses a lot on women, but men as well, and the various different trends. So when we're talking about the wellness industry, we're talking about over a dozen subsectors. That's fitness, nutrition, mental health. So it really kind of expands a big, wide variety of industries. But basically, it comes down to, why did everyone become obsessed with wellness? Is what we call the wellness industry actually making us healthier? And in what ways is it actually helping us? In other ways, harming us? And how much of this is actually science-based and effective?
So this is my third year of doing these pre-con interviews. I've done 24, and you're the very first journalist that I've had on.
Oh, really?
I guess journalists are a minority of folks invited to these kinds of conferences. What do you think is the most likely thing that put you on the radar of the people running this conference?
Well, I'll say this. I work with a lot of the scientists and a lot of the experts who are associated with this conference and skeptical inquiry. And so I think that's how I kind of became involved in this community. And that's partially because in my book, I explain how I was a journalist who covered the health and wellness industry. And I wrote a lot of pieces that weren't necessarily accurate. I was so focused on this big industry and how it was garnering so much attention and getting all the Silicon Valley investment that I didn't really care about the science. I really didn't care if a protocol or product was effective. And more or less, I started getting called out by scientists or people like Timothy Caulfield. And it started to dawn on me that there was something really wrong with health journalism and the way that we were covering the wellness industry, and that wellness was being treated a lot like fashion by the media industry. We didn't really care if these things were true or not, if they could really help people. We just cared, are they trendy? Do people like them? Are people talking about them? Are they making money? And this is at top publications, legacy publications. It's not, even just sort of the wellness sort of publications. So I would say that's how I sort of got to know people. And I will say that I listened to them and I became more interested in science and learning more about the studies and really sort of taking a finer look at what we call wellness.
Oh, that's a fascinating journey. Is that what you're going to be talking about at the conference?
I'm going to be talking about why health journalism has deteriorated so much in the past few years. We're in a completely different realm and really kind of pulling back the curtain of what's going on in the media and why potentially you need to have a little bit of a critical lens when you read something. And again, this is for all publications, unfortunately.
Let me pull up the CSICon description of your talk. So it is titled The Media's Role in Health Misinformation. You'll be speaking on Friday of the conference at 11:30 a.m. And they have a short description of the talk. It says, how is the media fueling health misinformation and why? Is it getting better or worse? And what do we need for better science literacy? Journalist Rina Raphael shares what goes on in the newsroom that leads to so much poor health reporting. That does sound fascinating.
I worked at NBC News, at CBS, Fast Company. I contribute to the New York Times, LA Times, a number of different publications. So I have a pretty, I feel like, good view of what's going on. And, there's a lot of different factors. There's not just one issue, it's multifactorial as to how we got here. But I think a lot of people can relate to the fact that they sometimes feel like they're not getting the information that they need from the news. And we want to trust the news. We want to trust these institutions. So kind of really explaining what exactly is going on behind the scenes.
Have you given talks at other conferences?
Yes, well, I spoke at CSICon last year, and I speak regularly at conferences like South by Southwest, the Health Conference, Global Wellness Summit. So definitely doing the circuit these days.
So what got you interested in being a journalist in the first place?
I'm curious, and basically, by being a journalist, you're paid to learn, which I think is really, really fun. I mean, every week I just get to speak to different experts and sort of delve into topics that I'm curious about. So that's how I kind of got involved in it. I started at the Today Show and NBC News, working more in lifestyle topics. And then I just personally got really, really interested in wellness. I talk about the fact that I'm a former wellness rat. I went to all the gyms, I tried all the kombuchas, I tried every single fitness trend, everything from underwater cycling to electric shock therapy, workout. Like I've tried all the crazy stuff. And that's why I actually started covering the wellness industry. I was particularly interested in it because I wanted to believe all of its claims. I really, really bought into the hope that it sold.
Were
Um,
you a Goop fan?
I was not a Goop fan, but I will say I was a Goop apologist in the sense that, I cover them from a business perspective. So I've interviewed Gwyneth several times. I covered all of her conferences. And because I was writing about it from a business perspective, all I really cared about was sort of their growth, and not as much about whether or not what they were selling to the public or their impact on women in general and how they were fueling trends, whether or not that was an issue.
Oh, wow. So what got you to change your opinion? Because I've seen some of your writings about them. Was it just after you had this interface with the scientists and medical professionals and you started looking into it?
That's part of it. In my book, I talk about the fact that there's a couple of things. One, I was getting called out by scientists here and there, and that made me a little bit more curious. But secondly, I also just started realizing that a lot of these protocols and products weren't necessarily helping me. They were actually causing me to fetishize my health. They were taking up so much headspace. It was almost becoming like a second job. So there is that as well. And I think a lot of consumers are seeing that now where they become a little bit more skeptical once they sort of adopt these trends. But the third, and most importantly, is that as a business reporter, I got a lot of access. So I got access to all these company CEOs, their marketing plans, their in-house scientists. And the more you sort of read about the company and their science, the more you realize that they were making pretty wild and exaggerated claims.
Yeah, the one I remember was the patches. I don't even know if they had holograms on them, but there were patches that did all these amazing things to your health directly. And there was one you could put on the bottom of a dinner plate and it would improve the nutrition of the food.
Yeah, actually, I believe Goop was one selling patches that they said was made by NASA, and
Yes,
the head of
yeah.
NASA had to come out and be like, I don't know what you're talking about. Right,
Yeah, secret NASA technology.
right.
So is that company, you still following them? Are they still growing?
They've actually had a bit of hardships, but they're a private company. They don't release a ton of stats, but from what I've heard from different sources, they've kind of not as growing as big as they would like. And I think they potentially wanted to be acquired and they were not. They've also kind of, I think, fallen behind in the trends. So, the wellness industry changes every 6 months, and they're really associated with, I would say, what was the previous era of the wellness industry that was really productivity pressured, perfectionist, really sort of aligned with this kind of girl boss era of working so hard on your health. And post pandemic, you're seeing a shift where people are like, I'm not making all my meals from scratch. I'm not spending hours a day on beat my body up workouts. I'm not buying the stupid CBD cream that I know doesn't work. You have a much more skeptical consumer now, that's tried all these things and bought all these trackers and end up shoving them into a drawer after a month.
But you
So
probably always have younger people coming up, right? Who weren't part of that other trend and they get caught by the new trends, I would imagine.
Well, it's interesting. I wrote about this for the LA Times about Gen Z's influence on this industry, and it's actually been a pretty positive one in the sense that they're so focused on mental health that they say we're not doing all of this work, and we're not going to buy into all these brands that are really working into fear mongering. All these companies that are talking about toxins, and you have to buy clean, and you have to do all this stuff. So they're a much more, I would say, skeptical generation. They want things more relaxed. They care more about feeling good. They were also raised by Gen Xers, which are just a more skeptical community. So they have a little bit more common sense than I would say millennials. I think millennials really, really bought into a lot of this marketing. And I think it's also, and I go about this in the book, the way that millennials were raised was very, very different than Gen Z. And that's partially why they fell for a lot more of the wellness industry scams.
Huh. Have you faced any pushback on your criticisms of Goop or other, wellness scams from the companies or their fans?
Oh yeah, I definitely have gotten threatened with lawsuits, but as a journalist, I think you know which ones to take seriously and which ones not to. Goop, for their part, doesn't care about bad press. I think they court it.
Yeah, any
Uh,
publicity is good publicity.
yeah, they don't get. And I mean, I was sometimes critical of her for Fast Company magazine. She still gave me interviews. She doesn't care, and I think that's, I go into this as well that Goop is very particular in the sense that a lot of the people who are into Goop don't take it that seriously. It's kind of like a fun thing for them. It's all about like this kind of crazy, zany stuff. They're like, oh, yeah, we know half this stuff is crap. And so you'll say, oh, good. Okay, they don't believe in all this. But the problem is that they're then treating health as entertainment. And health is not entertainment because inevitably you sort of absorb this anti-science leanings and ideas that are just have no basis in science or efficacy.
Why doesn't our government do better at regulating these kinds of things? And what can be done to change that?
Because the FDA is wildly underfunded. I wrote an investigative piece for Bloomberg Business Week that I spent 10 months over on about the microbiome sector, especially at-home health tests like Biome. And, they are completely engaging in what's called science washing. I wrote about this for the New York Times about how more and more companies are pretending that they have science behind them. They're using the veneer of science to get more skeptical consumers interested in their products. And more or less, the FDA is completely understaffed and underfunded. So they can't go after all of these companies. They have to be very particular about which ones they're going to pursue. If you do any search into Amazon, just go and look at all the supplements providing wild and exaggerated claims.
It's
They can't go after
nauseating.
thousands of brands. We're talking thousands of brands here.
All right. So the other thing that by my looking into you before inviting you on here that you do is investigating technology, right? You're investigating the tech industry. What specific areas have you focused on in that?
Specifically on health tech and wellness tech. Whether, again, these products do what they say they're going to do, whether or not they're protecting patient data and privacy, and just how they're being adopted by different sectors, whether it's the medical industry or even workplace wellness programs, whether or not that's actually helping the consumer or, the health payer.
It seems that your reporting has exposed some concerning data privacy practices. Can you share some examples of how tech companies have misused user data and what did you report on?
Yeah, so oftentimes you have a lot of these sort of mental health or mental wellness companies, everything from sort of meditation apps to apps that are more sort of embedded within the medical industry. And consumers trust them, even for sort of innocuous things like, let's say you're using a meditation app and it's asking you how often you feel depressed. That's sensitive information, even if you think, oh, this is just an app that helps calm me down during the day. And so there have been breaches numerous times with various companies. The interesting thing is that there was a study last year that found that more or less consumers don't really care that much. They're aware of these issues and they still go ahead and they download the app and they don't really care about it. And I think that's really fascinating in the sense that I don't think people understand what it means when there is a data breach and that someone has access to your private information. I don't think people think about what it means if your job knew this
Right.
information about yourself. So I think sometimes when it comes to wellness industry, I mean, people are obviously very sensitive about, if they're working with a medical insurance app. But when they think about lighter things like the wellness industry, they're like, oh, so if somebody knows how often I do something or how often I feel down, how bad is that? Well, it could be. I mean, would you want your employer knowing how often you feel depressed?
So how can individuals better protect their own privacy in, in a world that we have now with all these apps and social media?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard for the consumer about to know who to trust. Definitely read, all of the contracts that you sign for these companies. And
The
I
ones
mean,
that you just scroll through because they would be 20 pages
yeah, nobody
and you
reads them,
just
and
click OK.
companies know you don't read them. And secondly, just keeping tabs on a company, even just doing a simple Google search to see how this company vouches for, patient privacy, whether they've had any breaches in the past. There's no real guide to that because you are trusting these companies that oftentimes you just don't know enough about. And I'm not making the case that you shouldn't use any of these apps. I'm just saying it is a greater concern within the industry.
So the term surveillance capitalism came up when I was looking into you. Is that something you've dealt with? Is that what we're talking about here? Because they're surveilling your, for information and going to use it in a way to make money?
Yeah, I mean, although I think that's an issue with like all of our social media apps and whatnot. I mean, I think everyone is kind of familiar with the experience of you Google something and then you click on one brand and then that brand follows you for the next week on Facebook and in your Google Mail and on Instagram. You feel like you're being hunted by this one brand. And again, and I think there's just sort of this and I don't have data to back this up, but just from speaking to people, it just feels like most consumers feel like there's nothing I can do. It's inevitable. This is how it is. And I really wish that there was just, I don't know, I guess more pushback in terms of regulating these industries and pushing back against it. Because I think, especially after Facebook, we just kind of got used to it.
Have you seen the speaker list for this year? Who else are you looking forward to meeting for the first time and watching them speak?
Unbiased, I'm probably very excited to speak and hang out with people that I work with. So like Nick Tiller is someone that I work with in quote often in my work. Timothy Caulfield, of course. There's a good group of people who are scientists, but also dabble in media and journalism. So I'm excited to hear from them. And I think we're all going to be doing a panel together to talk, I think, about either longevity and biohacking and sort of a lot of sort of the male-centered science that's coming out these days. I'm putting science in air quotes because a lot of the biohacking stuff is sort of fueled by a lot of male influencers, and I think we're going to be digging into that as well.
So you've covered a wide range of topics, as is clear here. Do you have a favorite subject that you report on?
Women's health. I would say that a lot of my work really, really focuses on women and what's going on in women's health and how a lot of the gaps in women's health, not just research, but in care as well and information, is fueling a lot of the wellness industry and sort of these trends that are sort of offering a lot of comfort and a lot of hope to women who aren't finding what they want in the medical industry. A lot of them are attracted to Goop and alternative health because they don't feel heard by their doctors or they feel dismissed. Or to be honest, they go to their doctor's office and their doctor kind of shrugs their shoulders and says, we just don't have enough research on this condition, especially when it comes to things like autoimmune disorders or let's say anything with fertility. And so it kind of leaves the window open for a competitor to wheeze in. And a lot of times that's alternative health. And there is something different about this day and age that's very different than a previous era, which is that, oftentimes you go to your doctor's office, these people are telling me like, I get 7 to 10 minutes to explain my condition and then they kind of rush me out. And doctors themselves are frustrated with the system. They will tell you that they did not go to medical school to sort of treat patients like they're on a conveyor line. But what do? They find these communities and these influencers online. And unlike, let's say 20 years ago, if a health guru, had a book, that book kind of waited on your nightstand until you had moments to read it. Maybe it took you a month or two and that's it. And maybe you could write a letter, a fan mail to them. It's a completely different era now. Now you get daily content from these health influencers. More than that, you can DM them, you can establish a relationship with them.
Right.
People don't have the option to do that with medical experts, doctors, or even scientists. So it's kind of like this unfair playing field where there's just no way for the experts to compete against all of these influencers. But what you hear from these women is not, oh, I don't care about science, I don't care about studies. What you hear is real pain of, I'm at my wit's end, I'm willing to try anything. And this person is giving me the three words that are so important to me. I hear you. And that's what I think is kind of missing. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who are drawn to these wellness trends because it oftentimes comes from a place of pain.
Yeah. And I know I have seen those kinds of surveys of the average time that an actual MD spends with people versus a acupuncturist or chiropractor or naturopath. Yeah, and the difference is astounding.
Yeah, definitely. And so that's definitely, something for the medical industry to work on. But unfortunately, our system is not incentivized like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give to young journalists or those just starting out in their careers, perhaps thinking about being a journalist?
I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that the journalism industry has fallen on hard times. So, in general, I'm not rah-rah about people joining this industry right now. I think it's very, very difficult. But in general, I think it's good to have a very specific niche beat. And secondly, especially for health and science reporters, to really sort of dig into the claims and into the studies. I'm kind of surprised at how many health journalists and wellness journalists who are in the health field. Obviously, when we talk about health journalism, it's pretty wide ranging at this point. Don't know how to read a study, don't know how to evaluate a journal. And that was something that I didn't know either when I started reporting on this stuff, unfortunately. So I would say it's really sort of arm yourself. And there's so many people, including people who are involved with CSICon, who have written so much amazing material and have so many sort of available webinars to really educate yourself.
Thank you. Okay, so I think that's a good place to end this. Where can people connect with you on social media?
I would say I'm more involved in my newsletter called Well To Do. It's a Substack, and I write a few times a month about various trends and try to debunk a couple of claims and marketing nonsense. So that's probably the best way to interact with me.
Okay, thank you. Thanks so much again for joining me today, and I'm looking
Fun to
forward to
chat with
meeting
you.
you in real life in Vegas.
Yeah, it's coming up soon.